Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the relevance of and the time of and the times, sort of the events around the times of J. Edgar Hoover, from the time he was put in charge of the then sort of really the beginnings of the FBI as we later came to be known, and the events of the day and Hoover's efforts with the FBI to deal with those terrorist acts and subversive elements and so on. Now, I need to sort of go back a little bit in history. During the 1880s, in the Russian Empire pogroms, this is the days of the Tsar, this is before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, most of the people that were the troublemakers, or perceived so, at least by the Tsarist regime and their secret police, most of the troublemakers were Jewish, communist Marxist Jews, influenced by the works of Marx and Hegel and the social justice activists of the era. And these Jews had the view that if we can create a communist society where everyone is equal, exactly equal, then we've achieved a paradise. And at the same time, that means Jews will no longer be persecuted. So their idea is that they would be the moral custodians of this communist society, and but that would be a utopian paradise because everyone's equal and Jews would never be persecuted again. Now, nonetheless, these subversive elements, in order to achieve this utopia, they did what all utopian aspirants and radicals do. They went around trying to kill people and bomb buildings and so on. If you don't give us our utopia, we will kill you. And that attitude generally hasn't changed. Wherever you see ideological fanatics, you see that same attitude. Doesn't matter whether it's the Bolsheviks, the communist revolutionaries of the Tsarist era, Pol Pot in Cambodia, Mao and his goons in China. It doesn't matter. But wherever you see these ideological fanatics, it always reaches the point where if you don't agree with us, we will kill you. And it always goes down that path without fail. Now, a lot of these Russians these Russian Jews, that is, were expelled, and a lot of them went to the United States, which rather surprisingly took in a large number of them, and they primarily settled around the northeast, New York, and so on. And but their revolutionary attitudes didn't stop. So they come from an autocratic Tsarist regime where they had some legitimate complaints, by the way. And then they came to the United States, a vastly different structure. There's no Tsar or king or emperor or anything like that. You vote your government in, and there's free enterprise or certainly a much larger extent than there ever was in Russia, and a much wealthier place generally, and so a much better life, you would think, and yet their activism didn't stop. They still behaved as if they were fighting the Tsar, if they were fighting the evil oppression of an autocratic emperor in the case of Russia. So they came to the United States, but their behavior didn't really change. They still seem to be fighting the same war, same battle, same ideological struggle. And even their children, so the children of the Russian emigres that were expelled due to the Russian pogroms coming to the United States, even their children. So if you look at the likes of Emma Goldman, for example, the Jewish bisexuals, sometime lesbian, sometime not, Jewish sort of leftist Marxist trade union type activist of New York in the day, it's like 1920s or even earlier than that. She sort of typified that type of thing. I think they came from like Lithuania or Latvia, somewhere around there, which is part of the Russian Empire at the time. And again, their activism was quite pronounced in that part of the Russian Empire. So they were effectively expelled. and but they still become activists, and again, even the children, and like so, and by the second generation, they're still activists, second generation US born. So there's this bevy of activists that are doing bombs, assassinations. They're not all Jewish, by the way, but the Jews are very, very well represented in this group. And if you look at the sort of the apex of the communist Marxist type, the intellectuals driving it, they were pretty much all Jewish. And again, coming from the Russian Empire. So they're doing bombings, assassinations, general shit stirring, agitation, printing inflammatory leaflets. You got to go out and kill a few people. Our oppressors are now, they didn't use the word Nazi and fascist back in the day. It was too early for that. But you could easily interchange Nazi or fascist today with this type of agitation. So we're being horribly oppressed by evil people. These people horribly oppressed. They're evil upon evil, evil on triple steroids. And it is okay if we kill them. It's okay if we bomb them. It's okay if we shoot them. It's okay if we beat them to death. Everything is on the table. It's okay because we're fighting back against oppression. We are the warriors of the light, fighting back against the evil oppression. Now, as ridiculous and absurd as it seems, you mean you go around bombing and killing people because they don't agree with your view of what a utopia should be? I mean, seriously. So not surprisingly, these people weren't received very well by law enforcement authorities, but they were sort of all over the place in different states and regions and towns and cities. And there was no coordinated effort to try and stop them or imprison them or capture them or infiltrate them. And this is where the FBI started to come in. So this is after World War I and after the Bolshevik Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia. So now the Communist Revolution, the Russian, the likes of the Lenins and the Trotskys and the Bukharins and all this sort of thing, they were firmly of the view that the revolution in Russia at the point of a gun, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, that was an aberration because Russia was largely an agricultural economy back in the day. Their industry was actually quite small in overall relative terms. And the Marx had believed that really the Bolshevik Communist Revolution will come in the highly industrialized society because in his perception, they were the most oppressed, the workers in the factories, and therefore they would rise up and create this communist paradise. So the Bolsheviks and the agitators in and around communism had fairly high hopes that it would be possible to have a revolution in America because America was reasonably industrialized. So this was one of the things on their chalkboard of list of things to do. And they thought America was a prime thing there. So the Jews, the Marxist communist Jews in Russia, part of the Bolshevik government, they were doing what they could to aid and abet these Jewish people, Emma Goldman and the crowd that she ran with, to create or foster the possibility of communist revolution in the United States. And their playbook was always assassinations, bombings, murders, and subversion and infiltration and so on, much as it is today, by the way. Except today, the people they want to kill, they call Nazis, but they called them capitalists back in 1919, 1920, and into the 1920s. So there was a federal agency was sort of starting to be set up in the Department of Justice, reporting to the Attorney General, and that was the early stages of what later became the FBI. There was a bit of a mass political clean out there, and there was this young 25-year-old, 26-year-old, whatever he was, guy there who'd been leading some of the roundups and arrests of bombers and assassins and all that sort of stuff. And this is young guy, J. Edgar Hoover. Now, Hoover sort of did a profile on the sort of people that were doing these bombings and assassinations, and he came up with a profile that you could almost write today. It still applies today, that they were primarily Jewish, they were primarily gay, primarily lesbian, and had, you know, obvious Marxist ideological sympathies, and those were the four things. And they were involved, wait for this, they were involved in teaching and education. So the same profile applies today, for fuck's sake. So this was something that the FBI went after. Are you a communist? Are you a Marxist? Are you a homosexual? Are you a lesbian? You know, are you Jewish? And so if you met that profile, which again the great majority of these activists did, but anyone else who met the profile, who may not have been an activist, by the way, then they were viewed with obvious suspicion and doubt. And so because the gay, lesbian, the Marxist, all this sort of stuff, teachers were particularly targeted by the FBI, and rightly so. But rightly so, you know, they were the profile of the activists that were doing the bombings and the assassinations. You know, they bombed at the house of the federal attorney general, for example. If he hadn't got up to go into another room, then, you know, he'd be dead. So there were things that were quite reasonable what the FBI were doing in their profiling and the like. And this meant that the gay, lesbians, and the Marxists, the communists, the teachers, and this was quite similar to the sort of people that the Nazis were going after, because there was mass attempt at communist subversion and uprising and revolution in Germany, and the Nazis, you know, went chasing after those people, and they drew up more or less the same profile. And if you look at every attempt at communist revolution in Germany during the 1920s and early 1930s, it was the same playbook that you saw in the United States. Mostly Jewish, communist sympathies, mostly gay, lesbian. You know, it was the same sort of thing. So people like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and those sort of people. So this is something that puts J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI as the globalists and as the leftists and the foot soldiers of the globalists, who are the leftists, see today, is that there's no difference between Hitler and J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, in those times. Now, they rather missed the point that they both came up with the same profile of the communist revolutionaries because they were the same people they were dealing with. But it's not seen that way. That's seen as victimization and demonization of people who were only trying to create a utopia. We're only trying to create a better world. That's all we were doing. And that's the same sort of argument that's being bandied around today. So if you go and shoot Charlie Kirk or something and assassinate and murder Charlie, well, he had the wrong ideas. He's trying to stop utopia, so we're allowed to do it. And really, nothing has changed. And these people need to be gone after with the same fervour, I believe, that J. Edgar Hoover used to go after them. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, you can't